Um, Thank you all for coming, especially those of you from China, which is late at night here. Today, we are very happy to have Changgui Dong to present our seminar. He is an associate professor at the School of Public Administration at Renmin University, Beijing. He also got his bachelor degrees from that department and his Ph.D. from the University of Texas, Austin School of Public Policy about 8 years ago, I guess. His research is about the economics of energy and environmental policies and technology diffusion. He has written about the solar system in California, the pricing and the diffusion of solar energy. And he has also written about the pricing of wind power in China. So today he's going to talk about the feed-in tariffs for solar and wind in China. We will go until 11 a.m. Harvard time or midnight Beijing time. So please hold off your questions until the end. There will be a time for a question and answer session. If you have some important questions, you can type it in the chat in the meantime if you have some clarifying questions. Okay, Changgui, please take it away.
Okay, thank you, Mom, for your kind introduction. This is Changgui Dong saying hi from Beijing. Good morning to everyone. Let me share my screen at first. This okay for everyone?
I can see it.
It's okay. Yeah. I can see it.
So
okay.
Oh,
this is
good. Let me make sure. I don't need the presenter viewer mode. Do you see the full screen or just my presenter view?
We see the full screen.
Oh, great. Okay. It's my great pleasure to speak to this audience, especially at this time. So today I'll be talking about some of my works evaluating the impact of feed-in tariffs on solar PV and wind industry in China. I want to say that this talk is mostly based on some of my most recent publications co-authored with my former graduate students. Would also acknowledge their efforts and contributions as well. First is the agenda for today. I'll give you a brief introduction to the feed-in tariff policy in China. It's a special policy design features, as well as some of the policy issues commonly discussed by scholars and social media. And then I'll break down my talk into two parts. First is the impact of feed-in tariff on the solar industry at first, and then the counterpart on the wind industry. I'll conclude by offering some broad discussions and some of my future research ideas. As I just mentioned, this presentation is mostly based on two recent papers that I have published. One is on applied energy. The other is on environmental science and pollution research. For those who are interested, please check them out after the presentation. So first, I would like to give you a simple definition of feed-in tariffs for those who are not so familiar with this term. To me, FIT or feed-in tariffs is a power purchase price for renewable energy power generations, which is usually fixed at a certain level above market and usually lasts for 20 years or very long-term time. And this policy also comes with guaranteed grid access. The biggest advantage of feed-in tariffs is its payment assurance to renewable energy developers. And the policy has very strong certainties, which is very attractive to those relatively immature renewable energy technologies. The policy design or the tariff levels are usually differentiated by technological type, whether it's wind or solar, project size, resource quality, and project locations, etc. And this policy has been very popular across countries all over the world. So far, there are more than 100 countries adopted, including China. So China started to implement this policy nationally for wind in 2009 and for solar in middle 2011. Since then, the installed capacity for both wind and the PV industries has been increasing very rapidly, surpassing all other countries within a few years. However, recently, the central government just canceled this policy for new projects. And some of you may wonder, why are we still talking about it at this moment? I think there are maybe two basic reasons. First is about the special policy design, which I call zonal policy design in China's feed-in tariff. And I'm going to explain what I mean by zonal in the next slide. And the second reason is the fact that I think feed-in tariff is the right opposite to technology cost if measured in LCOE or levelized cost of energy. If we are able to evaluate the impact of feed-in tariff, one should be easily convert that impact to predict the influence of future technology cost reductions. So we are not, although we are evaluating feed-in tariffs, but what we are aiming for is really the impact of dollar per kilowatt hour changes. Okay. So next is the zonal feed-in tariff policy design in China. On the left, we have it for solar, and on the right-hand side, we have it for wind. The zonal policy design actually only started from 2013 for solar, because before that it's uniform. It's the same for all provinces in China, and the zonal means the policy divides the whole area of China into 3 or 4 zones, 3 for solar, 4 for wind, and that division is mostly determined by the solar resource or the wind resource in different areas. I think the central idea basically is to make sure that different projects have relatively similar rate of return in the end, so that investments would not flood into specific areas to cause any congestions. Another feature about this zonal feed-in tariffs is about its boundaries. If you look at the top 2 figures more closely, you can see that the zonal boundaries is not well aligned with provincial borders. Actually, it's at the city level. So there, in the northern China, there are 7 provinces, including Xinjiang, Qinghai, Inner Mongolia, etc., that cut across 2 feed-in tariff zones. In other words, they have actually, for each of them, they have 2 feed-in tariff levels. One is not able to figure out the exact policy level for them. For wind, there are 6 provinces that span over 2 feed-in tariff zones, and which would have the same problem. So to really estimate the impact of feed-in tariff, we have to come up with some solutions to these problems. And I will talk about that later on. As to the temporary changes, I show you the historical policy changes in the tariff levels for both for solar and wind. On the top, I have it for solar. As you can see, before 2013, it's uniform, and the zonal policy design only kicked in after 2014. And after that, if you look at the most recent couple of changes, they usually happens in the middle of year, which causes the so-called June 13th rushing for subsidies phenomena. By that I mean project developers they're rushing for a higher level of feed-in tariffs, and they just got their projects connected online just in time to do so. This problem will create some challenges to our empirical method. At the bottom, we have the temporary changes for the wind feed-in tariffs. And one thing particular about this is that the first policy change actually occurred almost 6 years later, which seems to be unbelievable considering the fast technological change in the wind industry. A serious problems would arise because of this lack of change or over-subsidization. According to a study by Xia, Song, and Lu, this over-subsidization will lead to high markups or high profits to wind companies, which further led to a very serious, very high wind curtailment. And by curtailment, I mean wind power generations just exceeding what can be observed by the grid. A second problem of this over-subsidization is the financial burden to government or subsidy deficits it creates. So by 2018, the subsidy deficits caused by the PV industry amounted to around 60 billion yuan. If you count wind industry in, that total number just doubles. And due to this huge financial burden, the central government issued this very strong policy in 2018 on May 31st. In this policy, the government just halted the subsidy quotas for utility scale PV and only granted very limited quotas for distributed PV. It has been called the strongest, historically strongest policy to the PV industry, causing a strong thing in the stock market for a lot of solar companies. Because of that, the development history or the trend of annual installed capacity for both wind and solar is not very smoothly. There are obviously up and downs for both industries, especially for wind. Despite that, if you look at the overall trend, there's still the installed capacity is still going up, which contrasts with the degressing trend of feed-in tariffs. So just looking at the data, there is a spurious, seems to be a spurious negative correlation between these two variables, which is very counterintuitive, and we have to fix that in our estimation. So next, I will talk about my work on the PV industry at first. In order to estimate the impact of feed-in tariffs on the PV industry as rigorously as possible, there are a few challenges that we have to overcome. First is the data issue or measurement issue, as we mentioned before. In northern China, there are 7 provinces that span over 2 feed-in tariff zones. So for them, we don't know exactly the feed-in tariff levels. So what are we going to do about them? The second challenge is the rushing for subsidies phenomenon. In econometrics terms, it's the so-called selection bias problem. By the, selection bias, I mean project developers, they kind of self-select them into better outcomes. In this case, higher tariff levels just before the stepping down or the decrease in tariff levels. So right before that policy change date, lots of installations will show up, will will also show up in the data, and making them incompatible with installations numbers post after the step down date, because people are who are rushing for the subsidies are more price sensitive, so their capacity is kind of different, the result of a different reasons. So in mathematical terms, ideally, we would like to estimate capacity as a function of pure feed-in tariffs, excluding all other factors. However, in the data, what we see is capacity is a function of both the current feed-in tariff levels as well as the forthcoming policy changes, which creates a confounding problem for us. So we have to solve these two challenges in our empirical strategy, where we have used the difference in research design. The reason is that when we look at the data, or especially the rushing for subsidy phenomenon more closely, we actually found very similar degree of rushing for subsidies between two resource zones. In this case, it's between zone 3 and zone 2. Because of the similarities of this confounding problem, by taking their differences, the confounding effect of this phenomenon theoretically can be offsetted by each other between these two groups. And our difference in difference strategy actually builds on the classical model setup. So in a classical setting, you have 3 terms in a difference model. One is the treatment group dummy variable. The other is the treatment period dummy variable, and the third is the interaction term between the formal 2. So in China's feed-in tariff policy, actually, we have seen four events for the policy changes or the feed-in tariff level changes, which occurred in the beginning of 2014, mid of 2016, mid of 2017, and 18. So to increase the sample size a little bit, we just pulled in all 4 treatment together and run the regression, DID regression together. And final results is what's shown here. And in this table, we have tried different model specifications. First is just a binary correlation between feed-in tariff and newly installed capacity in half year. And in the second column, it's a classical DID setup with no controls and no fixed effects. And then we keep adding terms into the regression. And the variable of most interest is the DID 16 term, which basically is the first time when zone 3 and zone 2 have seen different policy changes in their feed-in tariff levels. During that time period, zone 2 and zone 3 actually have seen a 0.1 yuan per kilowatt hour difference in their subsidy levels. And as a result of that difference, the installed capacity would show a difference of 30 on its face value. But we use 10 megawatt hour in the data. So really, this is 300 at a provincial level within half year, or 600 in a 4-year time. And the validity of our estimation results obviously depends on its underlying assumption. For DID, basically, it's a parallel trend assumption. By parallel trend, we mean that before zone 2 and zone 3 took a different path in terms of their feed-in tariff policy, so before that, if we can make sure that there's no significant difference between these two zones, these two groups, in terms of their installed capacity, will become more confident in our final results that the difference in installed capacity showing up in the T16 time period is only because of their difference in their feed-in tariff levels. And this is actually what we're seeing in this figure. And before T16 or before July 2016, the difference in installed capacity between zone 2 and zone 3 is actually no different from 0. Although there's a kind of a small positive difference in 2015 and early 2016, but it's not statistically significant from 0. However, to make sure we understand the underlying reason for this small uptick showing in this figure, we did something more interesting. So according to this figure, the difference is actually showing up in the coefficient of DID 14, right? That's because we're talking about the difference between two zones from 2000 within the period of T14. That 4.5 difference actually can be explained away if we consider two other factors. And in this case, we just add two more control variables into our DID regression. One is the wind curtailment. The other is PV capacity from the other excluded provinces. Just remember, we're just comparing zone 2 and zone 3 in our DID model, and we are excluding most provinces from zone 1. So this small positive difference is actually because of the serious wind curtailment or solar curtailment in zone 1, which basically pushes the investments into the coastal area, which is located in zone 3. So that positive difference, if we find out the reason for that difference, for this increase in investment and capacity in zone 3, the coefficient becomes essentially 0, meaning that zone 2 and zone 3 have almost a perfect parallel trend before T16. We also did other placebo tests just to make sure our estimation results is consistent. And basically, we're trying different treatment groups using the other excluded provinces as the treatment instead, just as a placebo test. And the second test we did is to use distributed PV capacity as a dependent variable. So both are not showing any significance in the DID terms, which is adding more credibility to our baseline results. So second is our similar work on the wind industry.
Changgui,
Yes.
I think it might be a good point here to pause and let the people with some questions. I think there's some good questions about your strategy.
In the chat room, or
yeah, but let me ask them to ask us. But Xiaoming, why don't you ask your first question first?
For the first question, I'm just curious. So here, there is a feed-in tariff for wind and solar. Do wind and solar power companies also receive like a regular energy price from the market or by selling electricity? So basically, for nuclear and the coal power plants, they are paid by the on-grid price, which is decided in the beginning of the project. Does wind and solar receive the same thing, or they only receive feed-in tariff? I'm just curious.
Feed-in tariffs, only feed-in tariffs, because feed-in tariffs is above the benchmark price or the. So
they don't receive regular electricity price, just the feed-in tariff. Okay, yeah. Thank you.
No problem. No problem.
David, David, do you have the question that you want to ask him?
Yeah, it seems to me that investment depends on expected profit. And profit is the difference between the feed-in tariff, which as you describe as declining, and the price or cost of generating, which is probably an economy of scale function, which is also declining. So, you know, it seems to me investment should be a function of the gap between the feed-in tariff and the cost over time. And that would give you a better, you know, I think, probably eliminate the negative correlation, which you correctly said is quite unexpected. And I think looking at that gap might give you a better structure to analyze. Thank you. I'll stop.
No problem, no problem. We actually took that approach in our work on the wind paper. So why should I no? Why wouldn't I go forward and talk about that as a answer to your question?
Okay. Okay. So I think one more comment from
Sure.
Xin Liang
Okay.
then.
Yes, I have a question maybe on 12 or 13 slide. That the equation shows that the feed-in tariff impact on the capacity. Yeah, yes, thank you.
On this slide, okay.
Yeah,
Sure.
but I think maybe the feed-in tariff maybe also can be impacted by the capacity. So I think maybe there is a endogenous problem. I wonder if there is this problem in this study.
Just to clarify, our dependent variable is newly installed capacity in half a year in the current half year basically, and the feed-in tariff is it's also the contemporary variable. So the endogeneity problem you referred to is probably coming from previous capacity, right? Previous cumulative capacity would have an impact on both feed-in tariff and the newly installed capacity in this current half year time period. So we have considered that adding the lagged cumulative capacity as the kind of a new control variables in our DID regression. I think the results stays.
Oh, thank you very much, Changgui. I think you should go ahead.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, no problem. Okay, my second work is on the impact of feed-in tariff on the wind industry, where we didn't find a good way to implement or to use any quasi-experiment research designs. So we just resort to fixed effects modeling. However, we have been very careful in selecting what explanatory variables we are going to include in the fixed effects model. Basically, so to explain the variations in wind capacity or wind installations, the variable of interest to us is the feed-in tariff or the subsidies. And the subsidies depend on the resource endowment. Resource endowment is correlated with other regional characteristics. Both of them could have an impact on our dependent variable. Other than that, the technological change or cost could also impact the feed-in tariff policy change and wind capacity development simultaneously, which we have to control for in the regression. And lastly, more wind capacity or installations in one single area could potentially cause a containment issue, which will further bring about government regulation policies, especially the scale management or the quota system, so which will restrain wind capacity development in a region. So based on this analytical framework or theoretical framework, we have been setting up the model following that framework. And first is the two key variables that we are interested in: for feed-in tariff and technological cost. And within the control variable X, we have included a set of regional characteristics variables, as well as scale management, policy variable, etc. And as in typical feed-in fixed effect model, we have the unit fixed effects and the time fixed effects. In order to come up with the right feed-in tariff levels for the 6 northern provinces in China who span over 2 feed-in tariff zones, in this case, we rely on the city areas as the weighting, as the weights to merge 2 feed-in tariff levels into one for those 6 provinces. As to our measurement for LCOE, that cost variable usually it's only at the national level. They're not regional or province specific. So in this case, if we want to include that variable, we have to do something about it to make it regional specific. So we kind of interact the LCOE variable with the capacity factor in a province, and then rescale its mean value to make sure the mean doesn't change before and after our adaptation. So with those 2 variables and the control variables, a bunch of control variables, we can run our fixed effects model. In this case, our data is actually at the province monthly level, so we have to use long panel fixed effects model. And in this table, we just keep adding. We kind of run the regression on a stepwise basis. We keep adding control variables, and one thing special is that we add a constraint to the estimation, which basically says that the feed-in tariff and the LCOE should have the same coefficient. So this is kind of a response to the second question raised by the audience, saying that instead of using feed-in tariff, we probably can use a net value per se. And the variable, the coefficient for this variable actually is pretty consistent, is centering around 20 megawatts in this case. Although please be noted that this is mostly monthly data, and we're going to compare this coefficient with other estimates in the literature. And as we just mentioned, our fixed effects model is based on our calculation of the single feed-in tariff levels for the 6 northern provinces that span over 2 zones. So we went further and conducted some sensitivity analysis around that weighting scheme. So we didn't change the variable as to be used as a weight. We just changed the value up and down a little bit. And so for each province, we use the city area, but as the weight, but we'll use 3 different values for that weight to combine 2 feed-in tariff levels into one. So in the end, since we have 6 provinces, we're going to run over 700 regressions, and the final results is shown in the figure on this slide. They're all statistically significant at 5% level and centering around our baseline estimates. So the result is showing that this weighting scheme is not very influential to our main results. In the paper, we also did a bunch of robustness checks, such as the reverse causality issue raised by the third question, and we also try to control for other augmented policy variables, such as the scale management or the quota system, and the results basically stays. So the last thing we did in the WEND paper is we used our central estimates and calculated its impact or contributions to the wind capacity development. So to do so, we just set the feed-in tariff levels into 0 or get rid of its impact in explaining the capacity development. And after taking away its impact, we see that the national cumulative installed capacity would shrink by roughly 80%, which we took it as contributions of feed-in tariff to the wind power industries. We have done similar calculations for the solar industry as well, and the contribution is kind of similar for both industries. All right, last section is some broad discussions and future research ideas. And the first thing we want to discuss is to compare our estimates with those appeared in the literature. And for the sake of time, I'm going to focus on the comparison for the solar industries as of now. And for the wind industry, the comparison is shown in figure 5 in the paper. So to make a fair comparison, we have to basically convert different estimates into the same level, which we have set to be province year level for unit increase in feed-in tariffs of 0.1 yuan per kilowatt hour. And we have found 3 similar studies and estimates in the literature. The first is by Du and Takuchi in 2020 on energy economics. They have used regression discontinuity at a county level, and their estimates is about 125 megawatts per county. If you multiply that by the number of counties within the province, which is 80 or something, you arrive at a number of 10 gigawatt at a provincial year level for an increase of 0.1 yuan per kilowatt hour, which is pretty high, in my own opinion. And we have arrived at a number of something like 600 megawatts annually. With that coefficient, we can further calculate the elasticity, the subsidy elasticity, which we found to be 9. And in a third study by John in a paper on energy policy, they have used GMM and instrument variable method and estimated impact of 120 megawatts annually with elasticity of 7. Lastly, there's a paper by Shao and Fan using spatial regressions, and they only estimated the elasticity to be 0.8, which is quite small compared to our results and the third paper. So different papers, different research have used different empirical methods, and they have arrived at different results. Since this is kind of a recorded, the only thing I want to say at this point is that I am quite confident about my results. I don't want to attack other papers in this at this moment, but let's see if there are questions on that. The second discussion I want to have is to talk about the role of feed-in tariff and the LCOE in economic potential or deployment studies. there are different ways to use our estimation results. One thing is to basically use the feed-in tariff levels and add up something, add up a certain value like 0.05 and divide it by the long-term marginal cost as a multiplier for capacity forecast. Basically, it's using the relative profitability of the solar project, and just imagine they will bring about capacity development by a certain multiplier, and that multiplier is, to be realistic, should come from our estimation. However, in models like system dynamics, I'm not quite sure about their sources. And the second way of using feed-in tariffs is a straightforward way. They just include feed-in tariffs as a factor in the calculation of project NPV, and then NPV greater than 0 would become economically viable. So really, there is no direct relationship between feed-in tariff and economic potentials. This is done by a paper by Liu in 2021. And lastly, in potential studies or deployment studies, feed-in tariffs or LCOE plays no role at all. So most integrated models, they just minimize the total costs, and by cost, they usually mean capital cost or O&M costs. They're not even using the metric of LCOE. So we don't know what kind of results would come out in those optimization model. And some other research even just specify the future capacity or technology deployment directly without using any functions or without calling for the impact, without using the impact of LCOEs. So there's no, as I said, there's no rule for LCOE in those deployment studies. So based on my little survey on the literature, I think our estimation it can be more useful compared to the literature. In order to expand our previous works, there are quite a few research ideas on different dimensions. First is to use more granular data at a city level, project level, to overcome basically the data issue or the measurement issue on the feed-in tariff levels. Second is comparing different statistical methods and arrive at more convincing results, or even try out more advanced methods. And third is to produce more useful results to large-scale models. So currently, estimating the marginal effect on the unit level changes for feed-in tariffs is probably not enough for those large-scale models. They could be a nonlinear relationship between feed-in tariff and capacity development, or similarly, a nonlinear relationship between LCOE and capacity development. So maybe we can come up with some ways to estimate a dose response function between the cost and capacity development. And the fourth extension is to try different outcome variables or dependent variables, still relying on the zonal policy design in feed-in tariffs, but use different outcome variables such as innovations, the impact of feed-in tariffs on innovations, wind curtailment, or overcapacity, etc. And the last thing I think is pretty cool is to better link technology deployment with LCOE in integrated models. rather than just optimizing the total cost or specifying the deployment futures directly. So we can talk about real applications of our work and this final idea. And I want to conclude by quoting one recent paper by Wayne and his co-authors. And in that paper, the title, they have called their approach as empirically grounded technological forecasts and energy transition. So I think that's pretty consistent with our research efforts here, trying to figure out the impact of feed-in tariff or LCOE on future technology deployment. I think that's a very promising way to move forward. With that, I would like to thank you for your attention, and I can take more questions now.
Thank you very much, Changgui. That was well-timed. I think many of our audience are not economists, and if people would like to have sort of a summary of what it means to have a difference in difference, then maybe you can ask about that. Otherwise, if we are open to questions. If you sort of raise your hand and then unmute after I recognize you. So while we're waiting for people to show up with questions, let me ask one thing first. The investor is interested in revenue, and revenue would be the feed-in tariff times the hours of operation, excluding the curtailment. So does this quantity variable something that we should explicitly include in this analysis? The rate of curtailment has changed a lot over the years, and does that matter?
The wind curtailment?
Yes. Well,
yes, they have been changing over time, and so that's probably a result of feed-in tariff. Remember,
but that's an endogenous effect, right? We are saying that the investment decision should depend on the expected revenue, and revenue will be the feed-in tariff times the number of hours that you can sell. So,
sure.
So what I'm saying is the expectation of the number of hours that you can sell might have changed over the years.
Well, I think we do see serious wind curtailment and even solar curtailment especially in zone 1, right?
Yeah.
So in zone 1, we do see serious curtailment for wind and solar, and that might be an issue if we use their data directly in our model. So in our estimations, we are basically only comparing zone 2 to zone 3. So curtailment is not very serious in these two regions, and as a kind of a robustness check or placebo robustness checks, we kind of included the wind curtailment rates that we've seen in provinces in zone 1 into the regression, and I think that's one way to control for that. Actually, it's very helpful. I think it's helpful to our DID estimation as well. I'm not sure if that answer you.
Okay, that's good. I guess Chen Xiang has a question. Unmute yourself.
Thank you, Mo, and thank you, Professor Dong, for your great presentation. And my question is related to the multi-policy interactions. I understand you already did the DID and passed the parallel test, but I'm wondering, like, what's the effect of the carbon market? And how, because like zone 2, they also have the Beijing and Tianjin included there, and they have the carbon market. So I'm wondering your opinion about how the carbon market policy interact with the feed-in tariff. Meanwhile, like in as related to the heterogeneity of the different sectors. Like for example, you tested a feed-in tariff effects on the solar and wind sector, but I'm wondering, like, have you tried any tests related to the feed-in tariff, their effects on the hydropower? Because currently the national government, they also try to promote the development of the hydropower. Yeah, so that's 2 questions. Thank you very much.
No problem. Very good questions. For the first one, the policy interaction effect, we do have included this variable in our regression for both wind and solar. They're not showing up significant. I think if I remember correctly, Meng and Tao Ding had a paper estimating the impact of a carbon trade pilot program on the coal usage and the even non-coal power generations. And I believe the reason is that carbon trade is only in promoting maybe hydro or nuclear power generations, not specifically promoting the usage of renewable, the wind and solar per se. So that's why we didn't see a big coefficient or significant coefficient in our model, in our regressions for both wind and solar. We did try to include that, and that's the answer to your first question. I'm sure there are other policies that could be correlated with the feed-in tariff, and we have done some justifications for that in the paper. Regarding your second question on feed-in tariffs for hydropower, actually, I'm not so familiar. I'm not so sure there is a feed-in tariff policy for hydropower in China. Maybe you meant the on-grid tariff, not the feed-in tariff, although they're very similar. But I think the on-grid tariff is probably it's a uniform policy, or it's a case-by-case policy. Not they're not using the zonal policy design. That's my impression. I'm not so sure about that, though. Okay.
Thank you. Changgui. Anyone else? If not, then I'd like you to ask about your data. Yeah.
David has another question.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see your hand, David. Please go ahead, David.
This is more of a suggestion than a question. I think your work is highly applicable to other countries that are struggling with feed-in tariffs, although of course the situations are, institutionally are somewhat different. But I think, every developer wants a high feed-in tariff for a very long period, and resources are limited. So if you could focus your analytical tools on what is an acceptable feed-in tariff for a given a desired amount of renewable energy, which I think you get at with the elasticity, that would be very helpful and more generally applicable you know, for a number of countries. The other point I would just make is that, as you know very well, renewable energy is highly sensitive to financing costs. And I didn't see that except implicitly in the levelized cost of energy. But if financing costs are highly variable, and especially if they're going up, that could affect the feed-in tariff effectiveness. You know, if you have one set of assumptions and one set of interest rate assumptions, and then they change, you know, that would need to be addressed analytically. Thank you. I'll stop there. And again, it's not really a question, so I apologize.
No problem, no problem. Very good comments. So for the when feed-in tariff papers, we do compare our estimates with those estimates from different countries, and I think that's a very interesting comparison over there. And we actually literally compare our estimates with a German study, and I think the results, although from two different countries, but the results are actually comparable, which is surprising to me. Regarding your second comment on financial costs, I think overall they should be included in the LCOE calculation, and if not, I think we need to get better data on the financing costs. But in general, I think it should be included. And the second thing is financing cost. Regarding financing cost, I'm not sure whether we should see any significant difference in terms of financing cost between different resource zones. So maybe it's in a different dimension. The financing cost may vary from one province to another, not following the zone borderlines. However, if it's a irrelevant factor to the zone division, I think, you know, not taking that into account wouldn't cause a very serious problem. Again, anyway, thank you for your valuable comments.
Is there anyone else? I don't see a hand. So in that context, then let me ask this last thing. Then, what exactly is your LCOE data? Is it you have a
from ARENA
actual data, or is it something else?
Well, it's from ARENA, the International Renewable Energy.
And what is that? That is their survey. It's not an actual reported cost, is it?
I think they are. I think there are a bunch of international organizations. They survey project developers and companies, and they will collect their data by categories, and that will, I think, build into their LCOE calculations. Different, I think, all different costs and the revenues, and as well as the energy production.
So you have the LCOE by province as the provincial average? Is that what you have?
I don't have that. I only have it at the national level.
So your LCOE subscript is actually for the whole country. You don't have a LCOE subscript I.
Subscript I think I try to explain that I interact. I did some trick over there. I interact the national LCOE with the provincial level capacity factor variable to make it province specific.
I see. So to me, that has always been a big difficulty. I think that the electricity modeling and this empirical work has to struggle with. We don't seem to have very good data, especially for the land costs.
Right.
So part of the windmill and the solar is to pay for the land, and I'm thinking that there might be an issue because the price of the land and the resource availability might be correlated. So there might be something there that you do not see because you do not have a province specific or even county specific LCOE that might.
Right. That's
part of
definitely
the
a data.
problem. Yeah.
That's definitely a data challenge over there. A lot of literature is adopting this way, but it's not perfect. We definitely could omit other variables, and there will be some endogeneity problems in our model. That we have to acknowledge as limitations.
Okay, it is already past midnight in Beijing. If there are no more important questions, then I'd like to thank our speaker Changgui Dong very much, and so many of you to join in our seminar. So we hope to catch up with you offline, Changgui. So in the meantime, this event is recorded, and I think there'll be an email announcing when we will get the text the email. But Chris, you have something to say?
Nope. I'm just clapping.
Okay. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody in China, and good morning to the rest of you.
Thank you all for coming, and have a good day.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.